Lovely. Sorry, guys. It just takes a couple of seconds for the recording to kick in when we go live. So thank you for coming over to our final session, session 3, where we're going to be covering, obviously, this topic here with Gavin and myself. And then we'll also have Vincent from Dublin City Council talking about that interesting project we did recently. And then we'll close out this particular session with Ciaran talking around data sharing. So Gavin, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, so we're just going to have a quick run through looking at some of the ways we can use FME, FME server, just to sort of manage and help us sort of migrate and move data around ArcGis Online, but also not just really ArcGis Online, ArcGis Portal, ArcGis Enterprise, and some of the different ways we can move data from desktop up onto the cloud, between different cloud instances, but also between an on-premise deployment versus a cloud deployment, or between even on-premise deployments. There's lots of different ways we can move and manage our data within sort of the ArcGIS environment. I seem to have drawn the short straw with the whole dark side thing, because obviously with Esri, we are not the Esri vendor. So I definitely seem to have picked the dark side of this one for today. So other GIS platforms are available, but obviously we know Esri is really popular with our user base, and obviously a lot of our users are using it. A lot of the time that's to do publishing to ArcGIS Online. So we're not really going to go through this one particularly because you guys really do know how to do this one. So if you need to move data or get data around, obviously you have the ArcGIS Online feature service. There's the portal feature service there as well. But one of the big problems we tend to find with this is that it's really how do you make sure that data gets there. And the guys from NI Water there made a really good point before. One of the key things you can do is reduce that number of features down to commit to each of those kind of transactions. It does tend to make writing to ArcGIS Online a little bit more robust. We've probably talked in the past about how you can use the change detector to, again, help you reduce that down. But Don kind of alluded to it in some of these earlier presentations. They're making FME Server smarter about the way it handles writing to things like ArcGIS Online, but basically any online platform or any other platform you're trying to write to, where you want this sort of guaranteed delivery. So what we've done in the past is you can use FME Server, if that job fails, typically if we're going to something like AGOL, you go on the internet, there's a lot that can go wrong between leaving your organization and arriving at, the AGOL cloud, for example. Things will happen, the internet's going to break, to drop out, so your job might fail. So traditionally, you'd have to kind of then reroute it, try that job again. Maybe if that doesn't fail, then raise them email to say there's a problem. But hopefully, if it tries again in a couple of minutes, it will work. What SAFE have introduced with 2021 is this option to retry. And it's basically, if something fails, we can retry with that job. And we don't have to do anything complicated or anything clever with the workflow. We can literally just set up that retry for guaranteed delivery, and then hopefully it's going to hit and get through. Now, it's not just ArcGIS Online. This can be for anything, but ArcGIS Online is probably one of the really good use cases for it. We have a lot of customers who have workflows like this. They have a schedule, they have a workspace that they want to run that's going to publish that data at a particular point in time, but quite often it'll fail for no real reason. So previously you would have to build something complicated. Now we can just go over to that retry option. We can come in on that retry on failure. We can just tick that one on. And then we've got a number of different options. So we can say how many times we want to actually retry that one. So, 5 might be a little excessive. Normally you'd say something like 3, because generally it'll work the second time. We can put this back off comment on, which basically means that rather than trying, 3 times straight away, it's going to wait between jobs. So we might put a 10-second wait. So again, depending on the service, the connectivity, we can choose what we want, how we want to set that up. We can also put a multiplier in, which basically adds to that time frame. So the longer that it takes, we can add more time in, so it takes a little bit longer each time. We can apply a randomization factor, again, just to put a little bit of variability in. So depending on the type of fails that you're seeing, you can tweak those numbers to give you a better kind of performance or a better chance of that actually working. Once they're configured, you set the automation up. You'll notice that the kind of fail ports disappeared. Now we have that little retry port there, which just indicates it's going to retry. So when these workspaces run, if something fails, it's just going to automatically retry for you. Then if that one fails again, it's going to retry and so on. So it's just making everything a little bit more robust. And I think certainly for the ArcGIS Online services, this is going to give you a lot more robustness in terms of the way that you're actually going to get that data in. With also that, we've got the ArcGIS Online connector. So that obviously helps with writing standard feature types. But if we want to do a little bit more with ArcGis Online, we've got that connector. That's also what lets us do that traditional upload for a geodatabase, the publishing routine. So again, if we're having some complications with certain data sets, maybe there is a lot of data, we can use that same kind of design pattern with the connector to actually publish our data as well. It's a slight misnomer though, because that ArcGis Online connector also works for Portal. So even though it's kind of named as ArcGis Online, if you have Portal internally, everything that we're going to look at with the ArcGis Online connector works for the Portal connector as well. If you type it in on the canvas, you'll see ArcGis Portal connector comes up. You'll notice it's in italics, and that's basically an alias. So it basically means if you add that Portal connector, it's going to drop a copy of the ArcGis Online connector in, because they're basically equivalent. And you'll see it quite a lot with certain transformers. Transformers that have been deprecated. Some transformers have been brought together, but the old names still exist. So if you do look for the old name, you'll see them come up in that kind of italics. Certainly some things with like spellings as well. So if you spell color the American way versus, in English, then you'll actually see there's a difference as well. The U disappears out of it and things as you go through. So connector operations, it lets us list our data. So we saw in some of those earlier examples where we could list data out for things, look for data sets that have been updated, new data sets that have appeared. But we can also upload, update our data. We can download, delete operations there as well. And we can share permissions as well. So we can change the permissions of data sets, which again, if we're looking at publishing data, you might have it set internally initially until somebody's reviewed your data set. Then you want to actually update those permissions to make that maybe publicly available or more widely available in the organization. You can use that transformer to do that. The list one especially is really, really useful. So this is just a really simple example of just showing you how we can upload our data and then we can set that publication as well. So in this case, we're reading our CSV in, we're writing that out using our feature writer, then we're uploading that to the AGOL platform. We're running that then into the publisher. So basically we take the data that's been published or uploaded, we can then set that to publish. And obviously we've just used that Teams connector to actually link out, and we've got that data set layer there. So you can send out a message to say, this new data is now available, put that into a data channel chat, and then somebody can jump in, they can have a look at that and they can start to view that data. At this point, it's quite simple. We're just literally picking kind of some of the default settings for this. You'll see as everything loads up, it'll pick up some of the rendering and the styling for us. But it's a relatively straightforward approach to that publication. We can do more with that, as we'll see shortly as we run through. One of the other really useful use cases, though, is actually backing up your data or pulling data down from that ArcGis Online environment or from your Portal environment. And say it works for both, or if you want to move Portal to online. So here, what we're using is similar kind of approach. We're looking at the whole of that data set. We're running through from a list point of view with that first connector, discovering all the resources that are on ArcGis Online. So not only the databases, but the feature types, the web maps, and things that are associated with it. I'm just filtering down for a feature service, and I'm looking for a particular single feature service. And then what we're using is the REST API that comes with ArcGis Online and ArcGis Portal, which we'll come on to in a little bit. Basically just to run the backup command. So I can call that API and say, for this particular asset that we've discovered here, I actually want to back up that data and make an export of it online. So again, if I'm trying to move data around, if I've got lots of coded domains and things, I've got quite a complicated data set that just pointing the existing feature readers to isn't going to give us enough of the information back, or I've got lots of attachments that I want to bring down, I can trigger that backup. I can move that into a particular backup folder, and then I can use those ArcGis Online connectors and things to actually bring down that data onto the existing file system or wherever I want to put it. I might want to move it into AGOL, to Azure Blobs, for example, maybe publish that data and make that data publicly available. And again, I can delete that data set out. So I've got the RNY fleet data there coming down now as a zip file, but I don't need that anymore up online, so I can just delete that as it comes, or from the ArcGis Online platform through the API as well. So we'll see a little bit more of that shortly. And you'll have heard us talk about the webhooks probably in the past. If you've not, they're just a way of being able to have FME respond to information. So a couple of people were asking about Power Automate and things. You can have Power Automate push a message to a webhook and trigger an FME workflow. And the idea is what it does is rather than you having to constantly have your FME server checking to say, is there any new data available? Has somebody published a new survey? Has somebody updated a particular data set? wait to find out, do some change detection, find nothing's happened. What we can say is, yep, somebody's done something, push a message in, trigger an action. So rather than running lots and lots of jobs, probably 80–90% of which might not do an awful lot, we can just run those FME sessions when we need to, when data is actually coming in. And as people's FME servers are getting more and more busy, it becomes really useful. So the classic one we've probably shown you in the past is hooking this up to Survey 123. So 123 is obviously incredibly popular in terms of a lot of field force, people collecting that data. We can bring it in. In this example here, we're bringing it into that webhook. We have an initial workspace that actually works out what survey it is. Based on that survey, it then sends it to this dynamic workspace capability that's in FME Server. And again, when Dom was alluding to some of this ESB functionality, all those design patterns that are coming in, this dynamic workspace is really, really useful in terms of allowing you to decide at runtime which workspace you want to run based on the messages that are passed into it. So this first workspace, works out all those parameters, passes that information into that dynamics workspace, which then runs all of the workspaces it needs to, or a single one, depending on how many surveys you've submitted. And then if there's any errors or anything that comes through, it's going to fire up an alert to say that something's gone wrong as part of that process. But what we can also do is for any part of ArcGis Online that supports it, and the same for Portal as well, for on-premise, you can create a webhook, and you can actually set up a webhook against your feature services. So, if somebody's editing something in ArcGIS Pro, they're editing it on a web map, they create a new feature that goes in, we can set up a webhook on there that FME can respond to as part of this process. And you'll see there's that custom transformer there in the middle that basically translate the webhook messages that come in from your ArcGIS platform, be it whichever one it is, and we'll actually then start to turn that into information that you can use. And obviously then we're just using that JSON fragmenter to get out the attributes coming out from it. So there's an awful lot of power in there as well that you can create beyond just using Survey 123 as part of that Esri suite. And that kind of brings us to the REST API. So the REST API is probably one of ArcGIS's best hidden kind of secrets or bits of functionality. It's hugely powerful. Basically, everything you do on ArcGis Online, ArcGis Portal is an API call. So everything's kind of there in the background running via these API calls. What that really means for us is that we can then start to use all of that information ourselves within our processes and have FME start to interact with this in a little bit more of a powerful way than you would do normally. So this covers ArcGis Online, it covers ArcGis Enterprise, and it covers the portal as part of this process as well. It's all documented, so you can on the Esri website, there's a whole host of information about the different REST API calls that you can make into some of these platforms. If you're not particularly techie, then basically get somebody else to do it for you. There's a whole bunch of transformers already up on the hub that you can use that start to connect to some of these services using these APIs. So the online router, the service area calculator there's the batch geocoder, the geo-enricher, calls some of those more advanced kind of functions from ArcGis Online that you might want to enrich your data with. But you can see also there's some at the bottom there that will let you look at the number of groups, users and things that you have within your portal environment, on-prem. So you can start to understand, which users are in which groups, do a little bit of reporting off the back of that as well as part of that process. There's one there for checking, your attachment names or your attachment and your attribute names as well as you run through. Or you can let FME do it. So we can get FME to actually sit there and actually start to interact and work with all of these things, build up some of these process flows so that, we can turn some of this data into things that we can actually use across the organization. So we can interact with the Esri parts of the API. We can also then call out to other parts of the business as well. Or we can just use it to publish data. So what we've got here is this kind of return to service information that we looked at in that earlier exercise. So this is kind of that redacted version. So it's a nice simple spreadsheet. We've got all the information there. We've got some X, Ys at the far end to give us the spatial location. And then obviously we want to get that into our ArcGis Online environment. So if I'm just going to hit refresh here, we can see at the moment we've got nothing in there. It's just an empty one. So what we've done is we've built a workspace that we can upload that spreadsheet to via an FME server app. So I can find this, it's just sat on my file system. We can upload that there. And when I click on OK, that's going to go away, load that data then and publish into our ArcGis Online environment. But it's creating not just the feature service, the geodatabase, but it's also creating me a web application and a web map and applying all the styling rules and everything for that as well as I go through. So we've got the geodatabase there. If you use the normal feature service in 2021.2, FME will no longer leave those geodatabases hanging around. So if there's something that's annoying you, you'll be able to get rid of them in the future. But in this case, we've created them. And then we've got our web map as well. So as part of that workflow, we've created the web map. So I can now jump in and I can start to visualize this. So you can see here, we've loaded the web map. I've set it to be the marine-based map because it's marine kind of focused data. So I want to use the marine-based map. I've set the little ship icons as part of that. And I've also configured the different attributes that sit within that as well. So rather than showing all of that information, I'm just focusing on a couple of key attributes that I want to display to the user. So, as part of that workflow, we've been able to build all of that out. And again, we can then trigger that into a web map application. And we can see from the web map application. The only slight downside, I made a slight mistake when I picked my icon and picked one that's not available in the web map applications we're using. Those icons are only available in the web maps because they're reasonably new. So they're there. And obviously, if I then hit refresh, you'll see all of those layers that have been created. So from some user just, dragging and dropping the data they need to submit that they want to report or send into your organization, we can generate quite a lot off the back of that. And it's not particularly complicated to do either. The workspace that sits behind that is literally just reading in our Excel. We're writing that into a geodatabase, and then we're just uploading that. So we're just uploading that geodatabase zip file to our ArcGis online environment. I'm then just publishing that, so that creates me my feature service. These ones are nice and simple. It's not particularly a lot of complex things behind them. And then the last two stages are actually, again, relatively simple to carry out with FME. It's just a couple of HTTP callers making a request to those APIs. So you can see here, we've got the API call at the top. It's an add item recall. And then in that middle part of the screen there, you can see the different parameters that we're pushing through. So we can set things like the tags, the extent, the copyright information as part of that. What I want the title and things, the descriptions to be, can all be configured at runtime. And I can also come in and set all of this actual start operational layers. So we've got the item ID that I want to add. You can see the pop-up control that's available in there, so we can control all the pop-up. And then I've got all that layer symbology. And I don't have to worry about writing all of this. What I basically did was cheated. I used the ArcGis list connector and an API call to find out some standard templates for what it might look like. And then you can obviously just take that information and pass that into the ones you then subsequently want to create. So, you don't have to work everything out yourself. You can actually obviously leverage what you already have there. We're creating the web app in the same way, and then I just need to move it because at the moment they were sitting in some particular folders in the root. I wanted them to go to a particular location, so I've just got that there as the move folder around. And then the last bit is just doing that little bit of reporting, which you've probably heard us speak ad nauseum about in the past, about just to actually push that up as a streaming service back so the user gets some feedback when they're running through with the applications. They know what's happened as part of that process. So it's a useful way when you are building, especially server apps, is to be able to give that user a little bit of feedback, give them a report that says, okay, we've loaded this many features, this has been done, and streaming that back into that user for you. And obviously that means we can do, migration between not only on-premise systems, but we can obviously move data up into the cloud. We can also move data from portal to portal. If we need to, we can move portal to online, cloud back again. So there's an awful lot we can do when it comes to managing and moving our data around with the ArcGis environment. Not just the underlying data, but the web maps and everything else that sit there as part of that as well, to be able to generate all of that content dynamically. So you can build these quite easy publication routines as well as part of that process.
And yeah, that leads me nicely on just to close it out, just in terms of support from ourselves. I know obviously a lot of the councils and utilities have been tasked with moving from AGOL US to EU, and it's something that I know Frank is here, and something that we worked with him and Mark and Tony on to be able to develop a series of workspaces to help you to be able to audit what's up there first of all. So how many web maps, components, story maps, etc., layers, feature services, if you're bringing them all in, just to understand what you have there before you actually start any kind of migration process. And then again, we can also support with the migration, like what Gavin showed today, that Esri API is quite powerful, that REST API, and also FME interacts quite well with it as well. So we can move things like the geodatabases, the layers, images, attachments, etc. So again, you can always reach out to ourselves. By all means, try it yourself. But if not, again, there's a whole kind of support network behind here on IMGS that can support you with that process as well. Thanks, Gavin. Brilliant. So we're going to jump over just nearly a tiny little bit over. We're going to jump over and with Vincent or Vinny from Dublin City Council and Gavin are going to talk. Gavin, do you want to share the slides? It's in the latest deck, or I can do it.
No, give me 1 second. I can share them here.
Hey, Vinny.
Hey, folks. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Oh, your audio is much better now. I have the headphones.
Ah, good.
Yeah, like night and day. Brilliant. So really actually looking forward to this. Is quite an interesting use of FME all the way through. So I'll mute and I'll let, I think, Gavin, if you want to set the scene, and then Vinny will cover his side.
You can see the slides, I'm assuming.
Yes, I can, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so this one was just how we can use FME for digital transformation, or part of a digital transformation approach. The reason this one's quite interesting is it's probably a bit of a non-traditional use for FME in terms of, we talk a lot about it being data management and things, but actually starting to take it out into that kind of more application space is something that we don't see a huge amount of users doing, but FME is really, really powerful. There's an awful lot it can do that people don't necessarily always think it can do. And this has actually been a really, really good use case of actually how we can really leverage all of that power that comes from FME that's kind of there that people take for granted to actually deliver something that's a little bit more left field from where it traditionally comes from. So as I said, I'll let Vinny from Dublin City Council kind of go through and explain their kind of business requirements and things as well. And then we'll have a look at some of the more technical bits that we were doing behind that to drive that process.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, so we like to make things awkward for, as you know, that's what we like to do for Garrett and Gavin and the gang. We tend to come to them with some strange ideas, and they always somehow fix it for us. They come up with the ideas, they come up with a solution. So what we had for this actual project was we were looking at an end-to-end service redesign of our housing maintenance service. So everything from customer interactions with call center to how the actual the jobs are done by the tradesmen. So one kind of pinch point that we found was that when it came to the tradesman aspect, that everything was paper-based. We had no real-time information on any aspect of the housing maintenance service. Who was doing a job? Where were they? How long did it take to do the job? All those types of measurements that we needed that we just didn't have access to. So the way it worked initially, or the way it still kind of works now, is that the citizen calls the area office or the call center with an issue to say that I live in one of your 26,000 homes. I've an issue with my radiator. Can someone fix it for me? So it's tied into OHMS, which is our housing management system. It's a bit old school. It's not very user friendly. It's typed into OHMS, and then it's sent out to the depot. It's printed in the depot. It's literally handed to a tradesperson. The tradesperson goes off with his pile of pages, does his jobs, and he might maybe towards the end of the week then come back in then to the depot with his pile of paper and say, these jobs are all done. Can somebody please update them on OHMS? That might happen tomorrow. It might happen next week. Who knows when it'll happen? So we have absolutely zero visibility of where anything is. And even though we know the jobs are being done quickly, that the jobs are being done well, we can't see it. And this is the type of information that we need to see. So overall, it's very, the process is very manual. It takes a lot of time, and it's cost us money basically, because we're constantly chasing people down to see where things are at. So what we did was we came to IMGS with an idea for a tradesperson app that would look at OHMS, enable the tradesperson then to update the app in kind of real time. I won't go into too much detail. I'll let Gav go into that now in the next slide.
Thank you. So yeah, we came up with quite a high level of architecture Garrett came back and was like, oh, we've got this requirement, the customer wants to do this. Basically, essentially what we've got is obviously the OHMs, the FME server, and then there's the kind of desktop and tradesman workflow. So obviously the foreman wants to manage the jobs, the tradesman obviously needs to update the service and things through. So that kind of went round and thought, yep, FME can do that. There's everything there that FME can do. That's not particularly difficult. We've got the server apps, for example, that we can deploy. That's all going to be great. We can carry on. As part of this, though, there was a third party called FutureGov who've been working to help DCC with their digital transformation. And they've been doing a lot of requirements gathering. They went through and came up with a couple of basically what we call wireframes. If you're not familiar with them, it's basically a way of sketching out what you want something to look like before you actually build it. So they're a really, really powerful tool because you can build something to say, I want it to look like this, I want this to be here. You can check with users, get all their engagement, their feedback, before you kind of let the developers loose to try and actually build the thing. So it's quite a nice tool. And if you are ever looking at anything like this, it's a really good way of actually building up some ideas. So they came up with a couple of these wireframes, kind of like prototypes that don't really work. They're a graphical tool. So you can see here, we've got that login page. They can start to look for the different information. We can come in, we can search for what staff are available, for example. We can assign those to particular jobs. We can see which jobs have been allocated. So it's relatively straightforward, but there's quite a bit that goes on behind that. And obviously then we've got the mobile application so that we can start to log in. The users can see what jobs have been allocated to them. They can come through, they can find out a little bit of information, the priorities. Some of the information there might be information that's more aspirational, I think, to come through. But ideally, we'd be able to click on there, get directions for it, be able to call up to let somebody know that you're about to turn up. And then importantly, be able to confirm that you've done that job and run through and actually say we've submitted that. So as that's kind of evolved, they've run through. And obviously then Garrett came back and was like, oh, yeah, that's what we've got to build. And it was kind of like, well, that's quite a long way from the survey apps and things that we're originally thinking of there. There's an awful lot more functionality there. So it's like, well, how on earth are we going to do this with FME? So it's a little bit of a challenge, and there's a slight going around going, well, okay, what are we going to do? But actually, when we start to think about it, it's, well, actually, this is really, really straightforward actually with FME. FME's got all the core components to do that. It's just slightly rejigging the way everything runs. So what we actually came up with was we still can use the FME or the OHMs database. We've still got the FME server that's already within DCC. It's their existing one that they're using. But essentially, all we really need to do is to develop that kind of front end look and feel. And then everything else really at these days is just a web service. So it's a couple of Angular-based apps. And Angular, if you've not come across it before, is basically just a web framework. And it's basically what makes the web pages look and feel pretty. So it's actually also the same technology that FME Server is built on. So that kind of UI that you see when you're using FME Server is basically built on this Angular framework. So it's leveraging that same technology. And it's leveraging something called single-page web applications, which are basically a web application that looks like a mobile application or looks like a desktop application, but is actually a single web page when you look at the underlying code. So they're really flexible, and a lot of mobile applications are built around them these days. So it's very much on trend, so to speak. So it's like, well, we can build those apps. That's relatively straightforward. And obviously then we can use FME Server to drive all of the data into that. And obviously the easiest way to do that, and the most agile way to do that from an implementation point of view, is obviously to use web services. And again, that's just bread and butter to FME under the hood. So, we came up with traditional web app, developer went off, they can code it all up. But obviously we can then within that start to call our FME Server web services to actually start to enrich that with all the data that it needs each time it runs. The other slight challenge with this one was that we needed to use FME Server as the web server. So, because it was going to be quite a long process to get a web server rolled out and deployed for a particular application, and the idea was this was supposed to be quite an agile and quick to market kind of approach. It's like, well, actually, can we use FME Server to actually act as our web server to actually stream all of this content? You can use FME Server as a web server. It is obviously a web server itself. There's bits you can put into it to deliver that data as you would do a normal web server, but it becomes tricky to manage. And that was going to put a bit of a burden on the team managing that FME server. To them, when every time they updated it, they had to make sure they took stuff out of non-standard locations as part of that backup. So what we're able to do is leverage the resource folder that already sits within FME Server, put all of our code that we'd normally put into a web server there instead. And then we can build a workspace that basically picks up that data and compiles it into a single HTML file, which is exactly what we want, because we want these single page web apps. And then using the data streaming service, stream that back to the end client. And because it's HTML, we can set that up to be these sort of more modern progressive web apps so that we can access that, on our phone, resize and everything as part of that process. So it actually means we can use FME Server essentially as a web server, and kind of sat there scratching our heads a little bit thinking, well, how performant is this going to be? And actually, it's really quick. Those attribute file readers pull up the individual components, bring it all together within the last part of that workflow to serve up. And that was as quick as serving up a static web page. So, from a performance point of view, FME Server is very, very fast delivering these kind of small, high frequency jobs as well as part of a throughput. And obviously then we need to power all the web services that sit behind that. So we built a series of these kind of web services, and essentially each workspace becomes an endpoint. So you can, much the same way we develop them if we're developing them using the other programming language, we can build the workflow, we deploy it, and then we can call it in the same way. It's all nice and JSON friendly, so everything comes back as a modern standard kind of REST interface. And then each of what would probably be a method in a standard API becomes a workspace. And the nice thing about this isn't all it's no code. We haven't had to develop anything from code or anything like that for this part. All of this is just a standard FME workspace that's built to deliver content. You can as well, if we wanted to, you can start to put in kind of middleware as well to actually make it a single API. But because we had control over the downstream app, we didn't need to worry too much about that. So we've essentially built an entire API endpoint with FME to deliver this data up. And it's not something we've used with, obviously, the DCC application for OHMs, but also a couple of the other applications internally as well now. And we can drive these. And it's a really, really powerful approach to actually delivering data around an organization. We also built a little server app that was managing all of the users. So we have a spreadsheet for the users that then ties into FME Server's own user management. The users we're looking at here aren't actually within Active Directory, so we couldn't just leverage the existing Active Directory. So we've tied that in again through with FME. And again, that's just using the REST API on FME with a workspace to actually upload and manage those users. And again, this was to take that burden away from that core server GIS management team and allow the, another part of the organization to manage their own users without having to run through. And again, just to make that a little bit easier, we've put a little bit of a portal together, which basically aggregates everything together. So these are the server gallery apps you've probably heard us spoke about in the past, but they're just really nice landing pages to pull everything in to present that data. So in the end, basically, we've managed to get this app set up. So this has been served up by FME. So everything here you're seeing is being driven by FME Server. So the app would have been streamed in to the browser. The login, again, is going back to FME Server, being handled through the FME Server APIs for the login process. All of the data is being rendered and pushed in through that web service. So we can come in, we can see the different bits of information. Again, we can click on that add user on the side. And again, that's a web service call that finds all the available users for a particular depot location, renders them all up, sees how many jobs and things they've got through. Again, we've got the allocated one. So we can unallocate a job. So if somebody misallocates a job by accident, we can remove those jobs as well as part of that process. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, that can be delivered there. Now you need to know a little bit of obviously, web development to do this, and a little bit about web services, but it's not rocket science to pull something together that can be really, really powerful relatively easily in the grand scheme of things. And again, from the mobile side, we can actually set it up so it looks like an app. So you click on that, we can come in. You can add in your details, log in for your security. And it's all sort of progressive web apps. So again, this is not an actual app on the phone. It's just a web page that looks like an app from a user's point of view. But what it does mean is not only can we get all of the details for things like descriptions, but we've got that ability there to click on the phone numbers and then we can call them. So our numbers are just test one, so it's going to randomly call somebody in America. But we've also got the directions application there, so I can click on that and it's going to say, well, taking my current location, this is the address I need to go to. There's the routing component for it as well. So it means the guys in the field can actually start to find and navigate to where they need to go. And importantly, obviously, then we can mark things as complete. So we can set up and mark a job as complete there. And again, that gets pushed back into the rest of the system. And then every other business system from there can actually obviously see that data that's coming through as part of that process. So I'll let Vinny talk to the benefits. And
yeah, thanks, Gavin. Yeah, so can't really say enough about how much this has actually changed things for housing maintenance. Like, people are literally jumping up and down like with joy. It's seriously, it's smart. So what we've done, because of this, we're going to save tradespeople 100 hours a year traveling in and out of the actual depot to come in and pick up the printouts. Sometimes we're taking photographs on WhatsApp, sending them out. Kind of, it's not ideal. Now they get them straight to their phone. They can go straight from their house to wherever the job is. In terms of admin, again, hundreds of hours saved. Paper, because we're printing everything off, we're talking 250,000 A4 pages saved every year, which is outrageous when we think about it. And what it also means is, as well, is that what we kind of never really thought of up until recently now is that, with this whole blended working thing that's happening with the civil service and so on, the lads who work on the kind of manual labour jobs don't really get the benefit of that. But what we can do now with this is, rather than, like I mentioned, rather than having to come into be forced to come into the actual depot, they can be at home and they can be sent out to a job. They don't need to come in anymore to the depot. So we can offer them that option in terms of blended working that we could never really do before. So and also our depots all across the city. We've got 8 depots, and the plan is for them all to be made into a single depot, a consolidated one. And one of the issues that we're encountering is parking for staff. So all the staff from all 8 places across the city will have to go towards one single depot. Parking is a nightmare. The union are involved. But this is going to free up that issue. That's no longer going to be a problem for us. So a very simple app on the surface is having huge impacts the whole way across the housing maintenance service, and we have loads more ideas that we'd like to add. That I'm sure Garrett and Gavin will be happy to add for us. But the next steps then for the app is that it's going to go live in the next couple of weeks in Ballymun, which is the first of our places to go live, and I don't think it's going to take too long for it to get up and running really out there. We already have lads out there now who we set up on the actual test version, and they're messing around with it, and they're coming back and forth with feedback already. And then once that happens, once we get that kind of feedback, we'll make the changes to the app based on their feedback. Can you add this? Can you remove this? Can you this isn't working, and so on, which I suppose is par for the course with any new app. And then we plan to expand it then across, really across all of them over the next 6 months or so. Hopefully earlier than that, because people, once we get up and running in the first couple of depots, most of the issues will have been ironed out by then, and we can just roll it out then to the rest of them fairly quickly. So on future aspects to the app, we'd like to add, when a job is completed, that the tradesperson can take a photograph and upload it, that they can, or when they complete a job. One of the issues we have right now is that we don't really have the ability to add on an extra task. You say, I'm a plasterer, I'm a carpenter, I've built this wall, someone needs to come and plaster it, send out a plasterer. Those types of tasks that are kind of manual now, and kind of get lost in the admin kind of area for weeks at a time in some cases. That will speed that up. And also tenants, one of the benefits, the only benefit we have for printing off the jobs at the moment, is that the tenant can sign the page and say, yes, I'm happy with this work, it's been done. So hopefully we'll be able to add the functionality where they can sign the app instead of actually signing on a piece of paper. And and we already have other sections in the city council who've heard what's going on, they've seen what we've done, and are already interested, in a similar kind of approach for their own tradespeople and their own sections. So overall, it's been fantastic. So thanks to the lads, thanks to Garrett and Gavin and everyone else involved. They really pulled out all the stops, and as I was saying, we don't shy away from coming forward with these crazy ideas, and they're always there to give us a bit of help, bit of dig out. So thanks very much.
No, brilliant. Thanks, Lee. Thanks for having along. And yeah, no, it's crazy how something so simple, moving away to a digital solution, could have such huge benefits long term, even kind of some of the unexpected benefits that we haven't seen yet. And good to see those future plans to keep Gavin busy. Signing on an app, Gavin, I don't know, can we do that? I'm sure you can figure it out somehow.
We'll have to have a think on that one, but
yeah,
I'm
as
sure it's
usual,
possible.
we're going back to the scratching our heads. Great work, Vinny, as usual. Nice curveball. One thing just to call out on that as well, which I thought was really, really good, and it was that SMS to kind of close that loop as well, which I thought was quite clever. So again, after we do it, that the citizen could get a text message or an email, depending on what it was, just to kind of close that loop and say, yes, your job is now being complete. Thanks for submitting it. But also to give feedback as well, which is something further down the line. How did the tradesman get on? And again, that real kind of engagement that people kind of expect nowadays, which is brilliant. So thanks, Vinny and Gavin. I'm going to hand over to Ciaran, who, as usual, I always put under pressure. So we're not a million miles away from heading on to the quiz after this, where Tanya will tag in, and it's our first time using Kahoot, so we will probably need you'll have to bear with us a tiny little bit. But yeah, Ciaran, I'll hand over to yourself for data sharing. I'm not saying that word.
Data sharing in one way, or data democratization. So thanks, guys, and again, a fantastic presentation from the lads in Dublin City Council and Vinny and the team. Another great example of what we can do with FME. So really great proof of everything that can be done. So yeah, I won't hold people too long. Going back to my slide this morning, we talked about the key issues in digital transformation, and another big issue is that data is not accessible. And again, really I'm just summarizing what you've seen this morning. You've heard all of this already from Gavin, from Don. You've seen it in action in NI Water. You've seen it in action in Dublin City Council. So for data democratization or data sharing, there are key fundamentals we need to look at. One is ease of access, to provide self-service data access so that people don't have to be going looking for data, and remove the organizational system barriers. Again, Vinny's example is perfect. Providing the data to the guys, they're not actually having to come into the office straight away, removing those barriers. But also then providing it secure, again, the Dublin City workflow, having the login, data access being controlled by centrally, and then having a full audit trail. We've heard that, how NI Water are doing that as well. And now in this GDPR world, and a world where we're all getting very, very conscious of data breaches, being able to have data compliance and privacy, so providing authorized access only, and being able to mask and protect sensitive data. These are all fundamental challenges we have to meet. We need to increase the sharing of data, but we can't turn into the wild, wild west. We have to make sure that it's all governed and secure, and that people are getting access to the data they're supposed to get to, and not seeing anything they shouldn't. So again, repeating what you've seen this morning: data sharing, FME server, and the server apps. So server apps allow you to provide access data on any platform via governed workspaces. The gallery, again, provides an aggregation of these server apps, and you can see them again with the Dublin City example in a nice way. But all access is controlled by secure logon, whether it's Active Directory or OAuth or whatever the authorization is. FME server makes sure that we're locking down the data and people can only get what they want, and they only can run the workspaces that they need. And now we've seen with the automations that Gavin was showing, how we can be very smart in how the FME server can branch depending on the user, depending on the workflow. Even with the survey 1, 2, 3 being able to actually go, right, well, this form is a different form, so we'll move to a different workbench. With that, we also have seen again this morning, and Dublin is the class example. You can then have the self-service portals where people can get at the information, whether it's to upload or download, whether it, like I talked about this morning, on data quality, making changes, verifying information, making it easy for people to get to the information. FME can provide that full area. An old thing we forget about: published parameters. Something that FME has had for years in server and desktop, but actually is a really cool fundamental way of doing self-service, so that people can actually configure and customize the data in a governed way to the format they want. We've seen how the NI Water lads were, specifying map info or whatever, but also, selecting which area of the country you want. We now have, with the new server app, the ability coming in the release later this year to use location, to provide a new location map and select your address. So being able to refine the information that you need, the format you need, the date range, when you need it, when you want it from, and being able to have that self-service piece that doesn't require you talking to the IT guys or actually having to build complex IT flow lines. And again, I'm probably a little bit ahead of where the product is going, calling it an enterprise service bus, but you've seen what Don was talking about this morning. But what is there now is the ability in FME Server to create RESTful web services, which provides easy integration and also provides real-time integration. So by using web services and API, providing access to data in a governed way into other applications, that means you're moving towards real-time data access, which then means ability to do real-time queries, real-time analysis, real-time decisions. And that's the fundamental piece we need to get to when we are talking about digital transformation. It's not about having processes that run, nightly or weekly or whatever. It is now moving towards this real-time access to data. With FME as well, with the ability to integrate, we can integrate analytics and applications. We've seen it this morning with Teams, with all the different applications, but also with the business intelligence platform we provide, Sisense, which is a fantastic tool, has some really advanced analytic capabilities. We've integrated the old FME HTML reports with Sisense, so that you can see the data in the FME report and see the stuff that we've always seen before, the counts, the map, the information. But as we drill down into the information here onto the map and select some records, what we're actually able to see further down here is the Sisense dashboard. The more interactive drill down, being able to run into the information and interact with the map, so that we're using a business intelligence platform to drill into the data driven by FME. So again, just showing how easy it is to actually interact with the information and then start doing some really advanced analytics like this. But also, you can see here in FME, it moves off very fast, but in Sisense, we've got what's called explanations. So we can actually take the data and create textual explanations of what's going on, which senior execs love, because all the charts in the world are grand, but actually somebody wants to know a statement. Are we making money? Are we losing money? Are we having problems? With FME as well, FME platform security is key. I've mentioned already. We have all the Active Directory integration. Now we have also the ability to share workbenches, to share processes using the same kind of authentication that you see in Google Drive. And again, it's all about governed access to the workbenches. It's not just giving every workbench to every person. It's keeping that control, and that's key in your data strategy. And finally, as well, Don touched on it again this morning, being able to maintain the data privacy. So workbenches can be configured to restrict data access. So at the workbench level, you can say which columns aren't used. You can also use FME to mask, to truncate, to hide the data, and only extract the information that you need. And the FME automations and workbenches are self-documenting. So you actually then know what's going on. And we're seeing with the GitHub integration and version management now that you can have true developer operations with FME. And again, in a world when FME platform can drive data democratization in your organization by increasing self-service access to data while maintaining data integrity and governance. So not breaking any of these rules and keeping everything going properly. And that's me, Gart.